All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of our forecast contest. Today's the 21st, January 21st, and we're forecasting for the 16 to 25th, 9th. I think for today's agenda, we're going to follow our normal script here. We'll start contest for today's forecast. And I don't think we have any industry guests on here today, but it looks like we do have a couple research guests here, and everyone should feel free to kind of jump in. Before we get into it, any special items that folks want to make sure that we try to cover today, maybe something interesting about the forecast or some other research topic that we can spend a few minutes on?
As I mentioned earlier, I want to spend a few minutes just on the fact that the EC forecast is now the coldest forecast instead of the CFS.
Right. That's okay. We'll definitely come back to that in the forecast, and that is a bit unusual, and that's a good segue actually to the attribution. I'll go back. We did backfill the forecast from Christmas and New Year's, just with the normals and the EC and CFS. And I mentioned it's an interesting segue because, and Zach and I were just looking at this earlier, the CFS, I believe this is correct, I double checked it, the CFS forecast from December 24th for the period ending the 8th through the 12th was 182, almost 183 HDDs, and the verification was 117. So way overdone. And in this case, certainly the CFS was much colder than the EC. The EC wasn't perfect, but at least it was 30 or so HDDs better than the CFS. So, I mean, there's a couple interesting things here. Obviously, the bust by the CFS, but also just the fact that, both the CFS and the EC were far too cold, and the forecast verified warmer than normal HDDs. Quickly also show the next week, and this would normally, this is the forecast from, I guess, New Year's Eve. So this is our most recent verification, and again, we kind of took a hiatus in terms of the forecast contest, so there are no human forecast here. But the verification, this one wasn't as outlandish or as crazy. The verification was around 140, almost 3 HDDs, a little bit warmer than the 10 and 30-year normal, which interestingly were almost identical at this point. That's not a mistake. I double-checked that. It just so happened that the 10 and 30-year kind of coincided. And you can see the EC was very close, actually a pretty good score for the EC. And the CFS, again, was too cold, but not as bad. That's the verification from these two periods. I'm going to open it up now, and as I open it up, I'll pull up on Dynacast, Maxar's Dynacast, the verification, just so we can see the pattern and we can look at the 500 millibar heights. If you guys like, we can also look at the MJO patterns and things like that. But maybe I'll just open it up to questions or comments about these 2 weeks of forecast verification.
You can also pull up the Maxar forecast discussions. You can see what the EC and CFS weeklies look like, so we can see what the.
I was curious if this cold forecast is so just suddenly appeared in the most recent forecast, or has it been getting colder and colder the last week or two? The forecast.
Yeah, those are both great questions. I know I can't answer that exactly with this forecast, but I can tell you that when you look at some of the forecasts over the past week, over the last few days, there's been a crash in GF, like some of the models warmer. So a significant shift warmer. And we can see that through some of the progression maps. I'll show, I think it's a related issue. So let me see if I can pull that up. I was looking at this. This is an interesting analysis, a way of kind of analyzing the maps that you can look at. So I happened to just stumble on this earlier. So here's today's GFS ensemble 6 to 10. I think I think I'm saying this correctly. So you can look at the 5-day progression. I'm going to click on this 5-day progression for anyone, because everyone should have access to this. So here is the GFS ensemble 6 to 10, right? Yeah, you guys can see my cursor. That's the latest 6 to 10. That's today's 6 to 10. Pretty warm, right? So relatively warm. Here was the 11 to 15 that verifies for that same target date. So 5 days earlier, this is what the 11 to 15 looked like. It was much, much colder. In other words, this is how it's rolled into the 6 to 10. So certainly, at least with some of the current forecasts, this doesn't exactly answer Dr. Decker's question about that forecast explicitly, but we have generally seen this crashing or warming of forecasts as they've come forward from the latter periods to the earlier periods. I'm also thinking about what Zach just said. We can pull up, which one is it here? What was the date again? December 24th, right? Christmas. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, you know what? I don't think this is available. I actually checked this earlier because they didn't, Maxar, darn it, they took a day off. But, darn it, Maxar, no, just kidding. But they do have one for the 31st because I was cheating earlier. At least we can look at the 31st. It's loading. All right, so here, they did a pretty good job on this one. So here's the forecast from the 31st. And again, this was the one where the forecast verified better, although CFS was still too cold. So yeah, we had the CFS, and they used the median here. So sometimes our numbers are a little bit different. I think we used the mean, they used the median. But anyway, the CFS was around 162. The EC was around 148. And what did we say verification was for that? Let's go back there. This is for 31st. The verification was 142.
They went 137.
Yeah. So, you know, there's a few HDDs off or so. Again, the CFS with the biggest error, but this forecast was at least more in the, so it seems like at some point, right, there had to be, the models had to correct, in particular the CFS from the 16 to 20 as it came forward. And again, maybe it was in that 6 to 10 range. It's, we can't explicitly look at that here. Although there is, this is probably worth bringing up. There is one other source of information we can look at that this is a great reference. So you can, in Maxar's site, you can go to the archive. And so you can also use this site to kind of look at how forecasts have progressed forward. So let's see here. Let's see if we can do this based on model initialization date. Let's see what happens here. So these are forecasts initialized. This again, this is not exactly the 16 to 20. Unfortunately, we can't look at 16 to 20. These were 11 to 15 day forecasts from that period. But anyway, it's a nice tool that folks may want to play around with, where you can look at some archive forecast data. I guess an open question might be, I'll throw, back to that CFS forecast from the 24th, right? Maybe let's pull out the MGO here, because a lot of times we refer to the MGO as maybe providing some evidence as to why things may have gone haywire or something. The CFS had a forecast of somewhere around 180 HDDs on the 24th. Obviously verified closer to 110 or 115. Anyone have any explanations as to why, in particular the CFS, but really both model data might have been so wrong, too cold in those forecasts? So on the 24th, the MGO was just into phase 6 there. It's not an easy answer. Just looking at the MGO circuit, again, I don't remember exactly what the MJO was forecasting at that point. And obviously I'm playing Monday morning quarterback, but that's what we're trying to do here. Just think of possible reasons, not necessarily that we have firm evidence or strong evidence. But clearly on the 24th, it looked like, there was, it appears like there was indications that maybe it was going to go into phase 7 and 8, and possibly the MJO got cut off, right? Maybe it was a Rossby wave or something like that. But clearly what ended up happening is it circled back to what historically are warmer phases, right? And so maybe the models did not resolve well the progression of the MJO. Maybe the models, in particular the CFS at that point, was expecting a stronger circuit into some of the colder phases, expecting more of a ridge across Western North America, and maybe in part because it did not resolve the progression well, it also overemphasized the cold. You guys may remember we have, it's not to show, we have, I think here, is it this one? Yeah. This is a little research chart we've developed, MJO research chart, and this is as of early January. But you can see here, typically when the MJO, this is looking at, it's based on where the MJO is initialized, and then looking at changes 16 to 20 days later. So in other words, if the MJO was initialized in phases 5 or 6, historically speaking, there tends to be colder HDD changes. If it's initialized in phases 2, there tends to be warmer changes. And again, this is maybe where the model, we know on December 24th, it was somewhere around here. And again, historically speaking, maybe the models were thinking something of that colder change, but for whatever reason, I don't know, but maybe it got cut off, Rossby wave or something, and it got pushed back into some of the warmer phases. Any other thoughts or any other attribution ideas before we shift on to the forecast?
I see it's also, there's a strong gradient right in where it was, right? So it's near those cold areas, but you see if it's just a slightly weaker MJO, then the relationship goes to basically climatology. So maybe it just wasn't quite strong enough to make it over there into those cold phases. I don't know. So it could be disrupted by other things going on in the tropics. Yeah,
I mean, that kind of fits right with that possible storyline. The fact that instead of amplitude matters, right? It looks like, a stronger, deeper phase 6, 7 circuit, historically speaking, tends to have a stronger relationship. So again, the fact that, it was cut off and quickly recircuited or circuited back to some of these warmer phases. But then I guess there's an open question as to, why that happened, and is it predictable? Is it more predictable other than looking back and saying, well, if I had known that, I would have predicted a warmer outcome.
And is this, I'm wondering, you mentioned the forecasts currently have been trending warmer.
Yes.
So we're past MJO forecasts expecting more of a transition into the phase 8 as opposed to just sort of going back to phases 5 and 6, like this current forecast is showing?
Yeah, that's a great. I mean, that's a great segue into the current.
Right there. Yeah.
Right, it's a great segue into the current forecast. This is one of the things I was looking at when I was making my own forecast today. This deja vu, or historically speaking, I mean, you would expect some colder outcomes here in the 11 to 15 or 16 to 20 ish kind of. But we're also seeing some indications here of a quick circuit back into warmer phases. And looking at, I know this is a very more industry market way of looking at things, but this is also a really great product that Maxar provides us access to. So now we're looking, you can look at any of the models. I'm focused on the GFS Ensemble. We're looking at national HDDs, although you can look at it by regions of these tabs. So national HDDs, which is what we forecast. And what they show here is it broken down by day. So HDDs by January 1st, January 2nd, basically the day 1 to 15 day forecast, and then they kind of summarize it down here where you see day 1, 5, 6, 10. And then you can go back in time and look at a few different model runs back 2 or 3 days ago. The point I want to make here is we talked about how the fact that the forecasts have swung warmer. And by the way, these are color-coded. They're logical in terms of red and orange are warm, blue is cold. And look what happened here. There's a few instances of this, but I think the biggest one is the January 20th 0Z GFS ensemble. The right column, the left column here is your actual HDDs, the value, so 35.1. The column to the next to it is the delta, the 12-hour delta. And the 12-hour delta on this model run was one of the biggest I've seen. So they tallied up here, the 1 to 5 delta, which is the first 5 days, about -5. The 6 to 10, which is kind of in this zone here, was -13. And then the 11 to 15 looks like it was probably another -13 or so. So in total, the run went about 30 HDDs warmer. And it's compared to this 12Z because it's a 12-hour delta. So this is what folks were looking at before. And then this run came in. The GFS just collapsed on the forecast here. Again, just a much warmer change. And again, the reasons why, and this is one of the, Zach, you're starting to look at systematic errors in the models, and looking at the relationships to see if there are systematic relationships between the numerical models and MGO. This is one of those great case studies. Is something like this predictable? Is there something about what happened where there may be a historical precedence for this, or is this one of those, again, Monday morning quarterback's a lot easier than trying to predict it in advance. Okay, we can shift to the forecast now that we solved all the problems about what's occurred. All right, I'm gonna pull up today's forecast. Today's 21st. All right, so, and it looks like Professor Roundy also made an entry today. Erin is the new student at Albany who I think also submitted her first forecast today. She's working with us on the forecast contest, working with Zach and I. And then it looks like we've got some entries here from Professor Decker, Nat Johnson, and Philip, so that's great. All right, so who would like to kick us off today?
I can volunteer as tribute.
All right, Michael, and if anyone would like control of the screen, just please let us know.
All right. So my forecast was for 143.2 HDDs with, no, I got the wrong week. Sorry.
Do I have the wrong week?
No, I'm looking on my screen. I have the wrong. Okay, here we go. Okay, real forecast. Now, my forecast this week was for 143.7 HDDs with a spread of 35.6, which is 1/4 sigma higher than average confidence. Reason being for this, I'll get to a little bit later. So my formula stayed relatively the same this week. I just switched back to 60% teleconnections, 30% CPC. Most of the teleconnections, NAO, PNA, AO, and EPO, I all treated as warmer signals. And the CPC was in direct contrast with this, showing a fairly cold signal for the eastern half of the country, which I strongly disagree with. But that was the main reason for my increased spread, was the CPC being so much colder than I anticipated. You can see there on the screen a pretty large area below normal. So that I did incorporate that as a risk into the forecast. And that's really the main risk that I could see. No strong signals either way for colder or warmer that I saw, at least colder or warmer than my spread. And that's basically my forecast. Any questions?
So yeah, you faded. I guess you're slightly warmer than the 30-year, right?
Yeah.
So you faded. Yeah, you faded the. So is it? Yeah, we'll try to go through the motions here. I'll pretend I'm the jerky industry person here, trying to ask you tough questions. So based on your formula, Michael, the teleconnection signals that you see must be warm, right? Because if you had just gone with CPC weighting, I'm sure you would have been much colder than the 30-year, right?
Yeah.
So to balance the CPC, your interpretation of the teleconnections is that they point to a warm signal. Is that right? And that's in particular, what teleconnections do you put the most weight on and why?
Mainly this season, the EPO I put a decent amount of weight on, and the excuse me, the PNA, just because it's the forecast and range, because the correlation number that they give with the forecast at the 14-day period, the PNA has the best one by far, 0.65 versus 0.59 for the AO and 0.56 for the NAO. So the forecasts for the NAO and the AO are not particularly accurate at range. So I the NAO does appear to want to go negative towards that range, but because it forecasts that every time, I'm gonna continue to believe the NAO will remain positive. So again, warmer signal in the areas where the CPC has the cold air, which I found even more strange, interesting, whatever word you want to use.
Hey, Michael, let me, again, I'm still wearing my industry hat, still trying to be jerky. I'm looking at the EC and CFS, and they show numbers that are slightly colder, a little bit colder than yours, at least in me. How do you differentiate the teleconnections from the models? In other words, are you saying that you're looking at the teleconnections based on how they're initialized, and because they're initialized a certain way, you're fading the colder ECMWF CFS? Or are you looking at the forecast from the numerical guidance of those teleconnections? In other words, hey, the EC is showing that the PNA is going to be such and such on day 15, and that you're relying more on that teleconnection than you are the actual HDD output. I guess I'm just trying to understand where you get that 143 when the CPC is colder, the EC and CFS are colder. How exactly do you extract that number?
So it's in lieu of a strong, like super strong signal. So like about minus 1.5 or plus 1.5 sigma on the NAO, PNA, AO, EPO, etc. I kind of just default to either it looks like it's closest to. So the AO I can granted, confidence isn't really the right word, but that's the one I'm going to use since I'm sure you've got don't have too much time. The AO I'm pretty not pretty, but I'm confident that the AO will be on the positive side, which is a warmer signal already for the entire CONUS, not just the eastern half. But the NAO, with it being near neutral, I kind of default to what it's doing the past month, and it's been pretty positive the last month, and I don't see anything that would change that. Same with the PNA, it's been kind of floating towards neutral to slightly positive. There's one strong negative dip, but that's kind of the anomaly looking at the charts.
Hey, yeah. Sorry, but I'm almost out of time. I got to run to a thing. So I'm going to ask, so I think what I'm hearing you say, correct me if I'm wrong, but you are saying because you think that, let's say the EC, that the AO is going to be positive in these models in the 16 to 20, you think that those HDD numbers are too cold. You have more confidence that their sort of 500 millibar configuration is going to lead to a warmer outcome than you do that they're actual HDDs. Is that correct? Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all I had. All right. Thanks, Mike.
Yep.
Hopefully you can forgive the jerky industry person. All right, who wants to go next?
I guess I could go next since the CPC forecast has already been mentioned, and that's my formula. So with the more populated areas, more blue than red, I did go with elevated HGDs. And then I slightly reduced the sigma since the gradient this time, aside from Denver, is pretty much over sparsely populated areas. So even a small shift, I thought west or east, north or south, wouldn't have too much of an impact on those HGDs. So that's where I came up with my forecast.
So, and you were saying, Dr. Decker, that is it, so when you translate that CPC forecast HDs, are you fading it? I guess when I look at that, it looks maybe, the 30 years, 146, and you went 148. Did you fade it a little bit?
Well, I based it on the, I guess the 30-year average as opposed to whatever is in that spreadsheet that's always linked to, which I think was a smaller number, 46, 5 or 6. So yeah, there it is. It's really the 30-year moving average is what I'm basing it off of. So yeah, I increased it by 6-ish HGDs. And then again, this is, doing it qualitatively. I don't know, like Portland and Seattle are populated, and there's so some cancellation between the east and the west, but I figured the east would dominate, so I did go overall for a colder forecast. Elevated.
Okay. Any questions for Dr. Decker? And again, Dr. Decker has, anyone wants to look at the directional hit rate if you go to summary official. And I believe I was checking this out this morning, and I was looking at heating season specifically. And yeah, Dr. Decker has the highest, and this includes last season too. This is just at any time during the heating season, November to March, or it might be October to April actually. But anyway, the highest hit rate here with anyone with at least more than 3 or 4 forecasts. And while we're here, I'll just point to the CFS and EC. The EC is at 46, and the CFS is 43. I was surprised by that. I'm going to go back now, but the EC at 46, geez. Anyway, all right. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next. So for this period, I think it's February 5th to February 9th, I forecasted 145.5 HGDs with a slightly above normal spread of 32 HGDs. My formula for the new year hasn't changed. We haven't had any verifications on it yet, so I haven't had any reason to change it. So it's 40% 30-year, 20% 10. Mostly weighting those two metrics because they've been doing the best in this heating season, and then adapting the trend, and then some slight weight on the EC and the CFS. Based on looking at how the models were progressing, the reason for my higher uncertainty was the fact that just looking at the 16 to 20 day period for both the EC and the CFS, there was a pretty large trough in the east and ridge in the west, so that would lead me to believe that there would be some above normal cold. But then as the models progressed, there was a lot of warmth in both instances, and then it almost appeared that suddenly the cold was just there. So I saw that as a source of uncertainty. Again, it could be that the cold does come, but it could also be that the warmth stays and persists. So right now, it appears that the it's progressing to more of a warm pattern. So then by the time 2 to 3 weeks comes, it could be staying the same. And then I also noticed, as Michael had pointed out earlier, that there was a discrepancy in the EC and the CFS compared to what we've been seeing recently, is that the EC is now suddenly the coldest forecast and the CFS is not. And just from, history, that is another source of uncertainty why suddenly the EC so cold and the CFS is not. Normally it's the other way around. So like I said, my forecast is, I think, 1 HDD below the 30-year, but I had a lot of uncertainty based on how the models were progressing and what the models were actually forecasting in the first place. So does anyone have any questions?
I think I would just say that it's an interesting point about the EC and CFS, because you're right. So often, especially in the last few weeks, we've seen the CFS higher, in some cases much higher than the EC. And today's forecast is today's. Is this today's? Yeah, this is today's. The EC is, from a national standpoint anyway, is slightly colder.
Yeah, I think the main thing I took away is, like, the EC sometimes, that's not the one I was focusing more on, although it is interesting that the coldest forecast. I thought the thing that struck me the most is that the CFS is actually a warm forecast now. For so long it's been cold, so when immediately seeing that it was a warm forecast was like, oh boy, this could be an interesting period.
Am I seeing this right, that the Maxar forecast basically is flipped 180 degrees from areas that were cold in the last forecast are suddenly warm in the areas we're going to be warmer now?
Yeah,
pretty cool.
They made a big warmer than the guidance, right? 132 today. And slight digression, right? In terms of the why, I read this earlier. They talk a lot about angular momentum. They didn't. I thought they might say something like, well, there's a bias correction or this or that, but it just seems like they're almost maybe a little bit of a Michael-ish kind of forecast here, where, more looking, I guess it's not, I don't know if it's teleconnection, but looking at these indices and using this index in particular to fade the models, fade warmer. Any other questions for? I'll bring up one other thing I was going to say for Zach. Since we're looking at the ECCFS, I looked at this earlier too. From a pattern perspective, we can pull up, right? We can, one of the links here. Yeah, this is the 16 to 20 CFS average of the last 4 runs. And then I'll click on the latest EC, which came out last night. And it will load, maybe. There we go. There's the EC. So you can see the EC definitely, I would say, kind of looks colder. It's got that, big trough. What's interesting too, though, one thing jumped out at me. So the 16 to 20, you could see some clear distinctions, right? Here's 11 to 15. Or it's loading. And the point is that, at least when I looked at this earlier, okay, here's the EC 11 to 15. Let me click on the CFS. Yeah, and maybe I can toggle back and forth now. I felt like looking at this, I mean, subjectively, it didn't look that different, 11 to 15. I was like, okay, 11 to 15 is eh. And yet the 16 and 20, there's quite a divergence. I guess that, I don't know what that means exactly, but it did surprise me a little bit. Like, what happens there from 11-15 to 16 to 20 to cause that divergence that, that's obviously not there through day 15? And what does that mean in terms of confidence and things like that? I don't know the answer. It's just an observation more than anything else. Any other questions for Zach? All right. Would anyone else like to go here?
I can talk about my forecast. Yeah. So I'm starting to worry. I might be coming like the Joe Bastardi of the forecast team. I've been on the cold side for the last 3 forecasts, so I'm starting to worry a little bit. Yeah. And the next verification period, I'm probably not going to do well. It's coming warmer. So, but anyway, I still, tried to account for this, this tendency for this warming in the models with a little bit of a fudge factor, but I still wound up colder than average and above average HDDs. So the main thing is, I look at the tropics. I think the tropical signal does favor troughing over the east or the west. Consistent with what the CPC week 3 to 4. So we saw the MJO signal is cold, but and also we started to see this enhanced convection basically and it's persistent warmth near the